Obsessive-compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder whereby you have either obsessions or compulsions or both. Most people have both, but you can have one or the other. I've talked about compulsions, but what are they? Compulsions are repetitive behaviors that you're drawn to do because of an obsession or a belief or set of rules that you feel like you have to follow. An example of this would be needing to open and close your car door 5 times before you can get in, or walking into a room that has tiles on the floor and needing to count all of the tiles before you can feel comfortable in the room. The compulsions are hard to resist performing, and they typically give you a lot of anxiety if you don't follow all the steps. And for the diagnosis of OCD, the compulsions or obsessions need to be time-consuming, taking more than an hour of your day. So if you're someone who tends to check your locked door twice before you leave the house every morning, that is compulsive, but it's not a disorder. There's a certain amount of normal compulsivity and obsessionality that anyone can have. With the compulsions, you can recognize that it's something unreasonable, but you have to do it to relieve your anxiety. So let's say you need to check to make sure you've turned off the oven before you can leave your home. You go back in the house and you check to see if it's turned off, and then you go back to your car. But then you have the urge to check one more time. So you say to yourself, you know it's off, but you just can't feel satisfied until you check that one more time. If you try and force yourself not to check, you can leave with a lot of distress and discomfort, and maybe at even some point in the day, you may even question whether you really turned it off. It's like your memory of checking it changes, and now you're not sure sitting at work or school, and you've got a lot of distress about it. Obsessions, on the other hand, can be something that become hard to talk yourself down from. For example, let's say you fear getting HIV infection. Intellectually, you know that you get it from human fluid exchange. You can't get it from touching a doorknob or shaking someone's hand if you don't both have open sores. But you go to a party where the room is thick with people and someone sneezes behind you, and you can feel the drops hitting your shirt, and you can even imagine the nasal drops going through your shirt and into a hair follicle on your back. And now you have HIV. You come to see me, and I tell you that's not a reasonable way to contract HIV. You leave my office feeling somewhat reassured, but you still may go get tested anyway because you just don't believe what I said.
For example, one that everybody might have heard of, a symptom that everybody might have heard of, is an unrealistic feeling of being dirty when you're not really, but then getting a repetitive urge to wash your hands. And that can sound quite trivial, but at its most severe, this worry can be almost day and night for an individual with OCD, and they can wash so much that they can actually damage their skin. And I've seen children, for example, with bleeding hands, or young people who may spend 6 or 7 hours in the shower. So it can be a very intrusive and troublesome anxiety problem.
There are some common obsessional themes with OCD. Contamination obsessions, with or without cleaning compulsions. Symmetry obsessions, and this may come along with repeating, ordering, and counting compulsions. Forbidden taboo thoughts, and this is where you can get aggressive sexual or religious obsessions.
Nice.
And then there's the harm obsessions, and this can be fears of harm to yourself or someone else. Sometimes a woman can have a baby and have the thought pop into her head that she may harm her baby. And a really scary thing about OCD is that it's not always thoughts. Sometimes the obsessions are images. So a new mom can have a flash of seeing herself hurt her baby and be completely freaked out, thinking, why am I thinking this? Something must be seriously wrong with me. The gold standard therapy for treatment for OCD is called cognitive behavior therapy with exposure and response prevention. Essentially, you're exposed to situations that trigger your fears or urges to do the rituals, and then you abstain from performing the ritual or doing your usual coping mechanism.
There is also effective medication, which probably works as well immediately as the talking treatment does. So in 4 to 6 weeks, Either medication or CBT will produce an effect. But one of the difficulties with medication, although it is very effective, is that if a person hasn't learnt CBT, when you stop medication, their symptoms usually come back. So if somebody wants to try medication, and for some people, particularly with severe OCD, it can be helpful, we would usually suggest it's combined with. Very occasionally, a young person with OCD can be so unwell that they need to come in to hospital.
Mildly obsessive behaviour turns into a disorder really when it crosses a boundary and is at a level that becomes particularly distressing or starts to interfere with day-to-day life. So a lot of people describe themselves as having OCD traits, and what they often mean by that is that they have a few habits or maybe routines that they like to carry out in a very particular way. So we might recognise that the habits or rituals had escalated to a level that we would call a disorder if, for example, they're getting in the way of family life or social functioning or school life.
Well, people used to think it was pretty rare, and one of the reasons is that people who have OCD are very embarrassed by it, and so it often goes undetected for quite a long time. But with increased awareness and with good population screening studies, not just in the UK but all over the world, we now know it occurs at a rate of about 1% in young people under 18. The cause of OCD really isn't known. That's the honest answer. And again, I always make sure I say that to young people and families, because there's all sorts of incorrect beliefs. You know, sometimes parents worry they've caused OCD in their child by the way they've brought them up or something they've done. So the first thing I say is we honestly don't know the cause. But of course there has been lots of research and ongoing research at the Institute of Psychiatry and the Maudsley trying to establish causes, and we do have some clues. So one clue is that OCD does run in families, so it's somewhat genetic, not completely so, but it probably increases your risk about 10 times if you've got a parent, say, with OCD. And people with a predisposition to OCD, we sometimes think that an episode can be triggered by stress. So, for example, sometimes children report a bad episode of bullying just before they present with unpleasant obsessions and compulsions. But the cause isn't really known, and I think the important message is that it can affect anyone. It affects boys and girls at equal rates. It can start as young as 6 or 7 and occurs throughout the lifespan. It occurs in all socioeconomic groups, in people of all levels of intelligence.